We're going to be a little more cozy this morning in this smaller room, which, Sergio, have you started yet with anything?
I did.
You just did? Okay. Facebook Live as well?
Yeah.
Okay, I need to throw out a few disclaimers. As you know, we've been videoing all these meetings, and they then get uploaded to YouTube, and so they're out there searchable and available to all. But today we're also doing Facebook Live. So in this moment, but I should let everybody know in advance so you could, do your hair and put on makeup or whatever. And really the idea is we have a whole group of people in our community who are very active on Facebook. And this is one way to connect real time in the moment. We will not be taking questions and comments from them, although that is something that can be done at some point in the future. But it'll just be out there, and then that video also lives on Facebook so that people can go back and look at it. So I hope that you're all comfortable with that. If there's someone in the group that is absolutely, totally opposed and uncomfortable, they do not want to be in this, it's going to be challenging. We could create a table, as we did at coffee with the mayor last weekend. We had a table for people who definitely didn't want to show up on Facebook Live. But it's just another way to extend the reach of what we're doing. So we're meeting in this room today because the council chamber is rented out. And I think that's an important thing to be aware of, is that the council chamber is one of our facilities that we rent out to the community for a fee as another way to generate revenue in our cost recovery model in our community services area. And while we haven't faced that on any other Saturday mornings, every single Sunday the council chamber is rented out to a church group that uses it as their church facility to meet. And there are other times when it's rented out evenings. So just for you to be aware.
Let me ask you one question. I'm looking for a small house because I lead a yoga group for 10 years. No house can hold about 10 people. Is there any place where you rent out?
For 10 people? For 10 people?
So far it is about 10.
Yeah, we have some rooms over at the Community and Cultural Center that would be very appropriate for 10 people. And even there's a couple rooms at the Centennial Recreation Center that would be appropriate for 10 people. So yes, you can contact someone at the Community and Cultural Center or the CRC, and we can provide you that info at the end of the meeting. Yes, absolutely. Okay, so I changed things up slightly on my teammates at the last minute yesterday afternoon, so they're not fully informed of where I may or may not need them. But it's just to make this a lot more interactive and to get you all involved. And Chris, I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you that I need you from the very beginning of this.
Great.
Sorry, come up and join me.
You can get even later.
Chris and I have worked together for a long time though, so he knows I would never pull something on him.
I expect this to happen all the time.
Yes.
Remember the day?
Yes, Chris and I have worked together for
13 years.
about 13 years, and I met Chris before I ever worked for the city. And what I wanted to start the meeting off with this morning is letting you know that Chris is such a dedicated and wonderful city. Yes. And come on, it's Chris Gill's birthday today. Really honest with everybody. No. See, Chris doesn't really like to be intentionally in the limelight.
Yeah.
He doesn't mind being in the limelight when he is doing something on behalf of our community. He doesn't mind being in the limelight when he's singing karaoke. He is the king of karaoke. But I just have to take a moment, and I really did want to do this publicly, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to. Chris is one of those people that our community is so incredibly fortunate to have working for the city. He lives here in Morgan Hill. He's raising his family here in Morgan Hill. And I don't think in my entire working life I've ever worked with someone who's more committed and more passionate and caring about what he does than Chris Gioni. And Chris has been responsible for so many innovative things in our community, and innovative in ways that also are really, really about cost recovery, or looking at ways to be more effective so that, you know, we're not impacting the general fund. And I honestly just don't know what we would do without him. And so, happy birthday to him, but also just give him a round of applause for what an awesome person, though. He does have a bit of an addiction.
We sitting there?
This is the right flavor. I'm not going to do that. Anyway, thank you, Chris, and happy birthday.
Thank you, Maureen.
Thank you for being here
Very,
on your
very
birthday
much.
morning. And that just shows you how dedicated Chris is. He really is. We're so fortunate to have him. Anyway, getting back to the true agenda. I did mix it up, though. That was not really part of it. Because I want all of you to take some time to pause and think about what we've been doing the last several months. And so our agenda today first is an opportunity to really take a look over all these topics that have been covered. And I realize that not everybody has been able to be here 100% of the time, and that's fine. We knew that would happen. We've still got a very good, solid core of dedicated people that have been here the majority of the time. And we also have a few people who've drifted in and out, but still keep paying attention to what's going on. So we're going to kind of do a review of what we've covered. That's going to be a group dialogue. I'm going to tell you in a minute what I want you to do individually at your groups, and then we'll at your tables, and then we'll talk as a larger group. We're going to go through any questions that you may have. We've got access to every single PowerPoint presentation that we did over the last several months. Talk about kind of what you think the message is for outreach into the community. Harjot is going to do a demo of the Balancing Act tool, which we're hoping will be an interesting, engaging, and fun way for both you and our community to get a little more involved in the detail of the budget process. We're going to look at the schedule through June 2020. Some of it is still very much in draft form, and some of it we have to agree upon as a group what makes sense. And then really talk about your commitments going forward for how you can be involved in moving forward with this community outreach around the budget. If there's any, if there truly is a revenue measure or something like that, just helping the community to be more involved in this whole discussion. Does that make sense? Everybody feel okay with that? Okay, good. So, these are all the topics. I've listed them across here. These are all links if we want to go to the page on the website where we look at some of the detail. But to begin with, I'd like to spend maybe 20 minutes, let's say. At each table, you've got the handouts of these are all the handouts for every topic. Hopefully you, at some point in the past, had a chance to kind of look at them. Some of you have been here for some presentations, some not, but I think at each table, there's enough knowledge that what I'd like you to do is kind of talk through if you had to pick one, maybe two, but let's try and narrow down to one thing from each, in relation to each of these topics, that if you were talking to someone out in the community, you would want to make sure they knew about things that we discussed here, okay? And I'd like you to write them down either on the smaller or the big, and please feel free to open these up, that's what I'm here for. Something that will go under each of those categories, okay, that your team can agree on. And I'm trying to limit it down to one per topic, and I know that might be challenging, because I'm really interested to see at this point what you all think the most important key messages are from what we've talked about. And if you really can't, this is not a hard and fast rule, but I don't want a big, huge, long list. We've got the big, long lists. as you know, we've had long presentations, we've provided tons of information, but we have to distill that now to some really key points that you think are going to really matter to our community and that you would feel comfortable talking about with the community. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, and I'm going to ask you to go ahead and start those conversations. Chris and Herjot are here, I'm here, we'll float around. We're available to be part of the group if, there's only 3 of you here, but I guess the other tables are full. Are you comfortable with just the 3 of you?
Sure.
Okay, all right. So, hopefully you came away. If you need more coffee or something, have some coffee so that we can get going on some conversations.
I went to, I sat on the plane.
What you got?
I'm sure we all have.
The best thing from Starbucks.
And if you can come up with something for every topic, come up with something.
First of all, I ended up turning around, going back home, and turning on the TV, because I couldn't, there were no seats on it. And then it was constant chat. People decided where to go in. But
That's sort of my philosophy.
in the building.
Basketball game, kids basketball
The
game.
more things I'd like to
I do understand. Somehow we have to
Well, it's a really fun,
and we have to have development. If we
I
don't
know.
have
I
development,
guess I don't think
we can't do it. And people don't understand why. It's very necessary. I mean,
If you'd like to call it.
I would like to buy a capital plan every year.
He's looking for bullet point recommendations.
I think we need what I think we
For example, from there.
But there's no people who have to check that.
and I think
So that's what I think.
that's the wrong time.
I don't even do, but I did get.
But there is my
But they have to start with the church actually. I tried to search and find out what the phone educate them on how to get
Well, I think it actually goes deeper than that. I think the community is so people that like the single family homes that live away from the center. Other people from various reasons that like higher density. Ignore what the state's going to do to us. Just our own, the people who have been here a few years, 10 years, 20 years, I don't think we have a consensus in what we want to be, and then you have the piece about, here's an economic development plan that's going to take all this land and do this thing to it. So let's just add it on to our understanding how we go forward. The community and try to satisfy more people.
and talking to a lot of executives. You know, a lot of people want it to be. Some people say, well, I want to park in the back. I said, well, okay, that's probably selling it. Developer owns the land.
But that
I
RMA
think just under the wide section, I think we just want to put our sticky that says factual information. So I put but just do a new one, do a new one.
Then I don't want to keep reading.
I'm with you. Hearing economic. Then we're on to the next one.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I heard, so without him here, we don't know the specifics, or without city reps here involved in it, we don't know what the particular are, but is that redemption? Other businesses are having.
Wonderful, we need it.
Keep waiting that way.
We're having a great dialogue. This is wonderful.
That money has to be a month find a way to supplement what's coming in as a city coffee. Somehow or other.
So just the word, not dedicated pensions, but, we're held to that, we have to, that would be a big.
So Kathy just said non-negotiable liability. That's what I think.
Save our future companies.
10 more minutes.
So we have to kind of focus on our niche market, like
Yeah,
single one, tourism.
alternative economic development. It's not just what's going to fit everywhere else. And people are not going to drive 20 miles south when there are so many opportunities within.
You observe the discussion one of the things I'm advocating for, we have a discussion and there's no invitation about how and when we would have that conversation.
And not to be have to write this way. For additional that's affordable in the housing, or is it? I mean, if you have a school that you show up and people are just something else.
That's great. Are you guys ready? For a bigger discussion? Is everybody ready? Of course. Ready? I'm going to call time.
Hold on.
Doesn't mean we can't have more conversations. Oh, some people were listening. Okay. All right. This doesn't mean that we're not going to have more conversation. I just wanted to see where we can get in 20 minutes and see what you each came up with. So we've got a lot of interesting things up here. Not only is this great in terms of getting you to synthesize all of this information and distill it, it also helps city teams, city staff know, wow, out of all those presentations, what stood out to people and what didn't. Okay? So a few groups. If you'd like to, does someone in your group share what you put up here and kind of maybe elaborate a little bit on it? Could we start at this group? I don't know which group put which things up.
All right. So under public safety, one of the things we talked about was that often in public safety, people automatically think police, but really there's a pressing need for more fire EMS services. And remember, our fire department is also emergency medical, and also happen to have a belief that if we talk about different funding, many communities have some kind of a fire-related fee. We know we need to staff another fire station, and we know California keeps burning and that people have heart attacks and break legs every day. So of the things that people can easily understand, why do you need more money? We need more money for more fire and EMS. It's a pretty easy thing to get your heads around.
I'm going to stop you there for just one moment.
Right.
Anyone have any disagreement with that from what you have learned or what you know? Everybody agree that that is an accurate piece of information that was part of all of this and that we would want to share with the community?
Yes.
Just a little bit different view of it. My view is that we are going to fund public safety because it is #1 priority no matter what. So whatever additional money it takes, we're going to find it. But that's going to rock from everybody else.
Okay, and again, hello Facebook Live, but thinking as a salesperson, right? You want to sell what's most sellable, and yes, since we're gonna fund fire somehow, if you want to have additional revenue to help with that, that means maybe you're not closing a park in order to fund additional fire. So
You're
yeah,
not closing a park, or you are closing?
you don't. So if you have, let's take Steve Tate's statement.
Yep.
No matter what it takes, we're going to fund public safety. Okay, if that means it eats 100% of the budget, then there's a whole lot of things we also care about that go away that are more complex to communicate.
Yep.
So in terms of what do we want to communicate to the broader community, we need more fire and EMS, and that's going to cost money. So please, dig a little deeper. I think it's an argument to make in terms of what we we communicate, not anyhow. So that was one, and then kind of put it over here. This is probably nobody's surprised to hear me say this, but what people don't know is that our business community subsidizes our residents. The hotels, they subsidize residents big time. You go to a hotel in Morgan Hill, you pay 11.5% additional fee that goes to the city coffers. You go to a restaurant, there's a 1% piece of the sales tax that goes to the city. So you spend $100 at Ladera, the city gets $1. You spend $100 at a hotel, well, you're going to spend $111.50 because $11.50 goes to the city. And people don't want, when people were signing that thing, said, oh, no more hotels because traffic. They didn't know that. So we need people to know that businesses of various kinds subsidize, the things you enjoy, whether it's the senior center, the park, calling 911 and having help. That's all subsidized by your business community, and you need to know that. So as this, and I put it over here because as this requires us to, nothing requires us to have more businesses. There's no requirement. The state basically all but is demanding somehow you get more residents built. But to support those people, you got to do the balance, or we'll be in trouble. So those were the points I sort of lettered. Sally.
I don't have that much to say about this, but I do. I really kind of have a stake in this because I live in low-income housing, and I know this is really important. It's going to be a huge topic with the state because they want that to be covered. And also because housing is kind of related to economic development. There's people that live here that work at Laderos, that work at all the restaurants, that help those businesses succeed. But they need the housing that's affordable. So that's why I thought that was very important. It also is connected to the budget because people that live here, they buy here usually. And so that's kind of like all going to be related to a lot of these other topics here.
If I could just jump into and add a clarification point on SB 330. SB 330 demands that cities, basically eliminates any type of growth control, let's put it that way, and demands that more housing be built all over California, okay? And so in a community like ours that has had a growth control system, it completely does away with our growth control system for the next 5 years. It's couched in this idea of more affordable housing, but the reality is SB 330 itself does not require affordable housing.
One could argue it undermines it.
It requires more housing, and in fact, there may be some jeopardy for affordable housing. And we have done an excellent job here in Morgan Hill with affordable housing. This is not necessarily going to make it better for us to provide affordable housing.
So it's going to be up to the city to regulate that.
But it can't.
We can't.
No, I'm not saying as far as the money, but there has to be innovative ways to be able to complete this mission.
Totally agree with you. Our hands are going to definitely be tied though. This new legislation creates a whole new world for housing, not just in Morgan Hill, but since that's what we're concerned about, for Morgan Hill very much. And it's going to do away with funding as well. While if there's more housing, there's more property taxes. To John's point, property taxes don't cover all the impact to infrastructure and public safety needs and other types of amenities that the community is used to having. But businesses do, the right kinds of businesses and larger businesses.
And it takes people to run those businesses.
Absolutely. And that's the dichotomy, right?
And it's true, both our businesses, on the school board are various employees of the school district. The affordability of housing and therefore the availability of people that every organization can afford to do the job that they're doing is also a crisis. So they are joined. We need both.
Yeah.
We need more housing that the people that are working here can afford, and we need more jobs here that the people who already live here can work at. Both things are. It's not an either or. Both things are true.
That's true.
Yeah. Likewise, many city employees can't afford to live here either. We've got a lot of city employees who have to go further south because it's impossible to live here. Thank you. Okay. How about this group back here? You want to share points that you put up there?
You just finished eating my book.
Come on, Yvonne. So what did your group put up there?
Started talking about the budget. And when we started talking about the budget, that meant we started talking about economic development. And so in the budget, what we were saying was that, you know, every one of us, we don't want our taxes increased. At the same time, we're confused about the city budget, where the money goes, how we can raise money. It's pretty much like, you know, like your household budget, you know. The city needs money, but I can't afford to pay out any more money. So where should it come from? And so I think that's where people are confused about. So then we talked about economic development. And it was very clear in the presentation that Morgan Hill is at a disadvantage when we compete with other cities for tech companies. And that's because we're far out of the way. We're small, our costs are high. And so we thought, hey, we need to think about the image of Morgan Hill and maybe look at Morgan Hill's economic development in terms of niche markets. When people think about Morgan Hill, they all say, wow, a great community. I love it, it's beautiful. Maybe we can come up with businesses that enhance that. So we talked about tourism, we talked about recreation, we talked about arts, we talked about foods. Actually, this summer I went to Santa Fe. It's the third largest folk art market in the United States. They get millions of dollars. As an engineer, I have people who come and they say, oh, I'd like to go to Napa. And they're clueless about how long at 4 o'clock it's going to take them to get to Napa. So to be able to say, hey, there's wineries in Morgan Hill. That's great. There's great restaurants in Morgan Hill. These people just want to come to California, get their bottle of wine and go home. Morgan Hill could promote itself based on the image that it has now. And so that's about as far as we got. We started talking about how where there are and there aren't potholes, which I think when it comes to infrastructure, that's what a lot of people in Morgan Hill think about. So that's all.
Okay, want to just put it out to the group, because remember, what we're trying to hone in on is what you have learned and the factual information that you have learned in the presentations. So what about this? Because that is not what our economic blueprint suggests. We have an economic blueprint that was put together by a lot of investment of time and energy of many, many community members, also representatives of our business community, and it does not suggest that it does suggest tourism, particularly sports tourism, but it doesn't suggest arts or food as a way that, as businesses that we're trying to attract. And so I just want to, what do other people think? Do you agree with that?
And I want to say that partly the idea is we all have our own blinders, and who we choose to give us information and feedback impacts the suggestions that are made. You know, if we're comparing ourselves to Cupertino, Palo Alto, we're going to get a certain viewpoint. But if we compare ourselves to smaller cities that have similar environments, maybe we would have some new ways of looking at things.
Kathy?
I think one of the things, we're an agricultural community, and a product that we could sell is the produce that we produce here. So I've often thought it would be great along the freeway to have a Taste of Morgan Hill building, much like the Ferry Building in San Francisco or something like that, where local farmers and people of producing food could actually, wineries, could actually have things there. People driving on the freeway from here to there can go, oh, I want to go see what that's about. So I think food is something that we could sell and promote and not so much have to promote more restaurants downtown. I think we need more businesses downtown that create tourism traffic or traffic. So I just wanted to add that bit about food.
Okay, and I appreciate these ideas. Is that what we heard in the economic development presentation or in the information? These are great ideas, and I know everybody has ideas. We all have ideas about how to bring business to Morgan Hill and what are the right businesses, and yet that's based on our own personal experience and not necessarily research and so forth. Doug?
So you keep talking about what the city presented to us. What I'm interested in is what we say to our residents that makes sense to them. Most of these presentations have been of the style you would use talking to decision makers like council members or the more educated members of the community, most of whom happen to be sitting in this room today. And we are not representative of the knowledge base of our residents. And so, you know, you want to focus on what we got from staff over the last 6 months or so that's fine. I just happen to disagree that it's what we should be talking about.
Okay, fair enough. I guess, and maybe I'm not wording this in a way that what I'm hoping we can come out of this with, and this is not the end-all be-all day that this is going to happen, but this is the starting point of, yes, I would agree that the presentations you have received are high, you know, there's a lot of information. There's no way on earth that we're going to share that same level of detail out with our whole community or even get the interest of enough people. But what I'm hoping is that as this group starts to think about what people would listen to and understand, that it is based on the factual information that was provided. And so, for instance, when we talk about this is what we think are the types of businesses Morgan Hill should grow, what's that based on? Is it based on your personal feelings? Or is it based on some solid information that, because I mean, you know, there's tons of people in the community saying we shouldn't build any more houses.
Yeah, so I guess we diverged because of the way I put it. That was a response to the presentation, which basically said that Morgan Hill is at a disadvantage when we were trying to attract high-tech businesses.
And yet, if you look at our economic blueprint, and maybe in a minute we should bring up the image that shows you the different areas that the economic development team is focused on in terms of trying to attract business, that is where that team is working. And please tell me if you disagree.
May I respond, Maureen? Since Edith and John are here from the city's economic, but I've been on this journey alongside them a lot. So to the niche tourism area, so the economic development blueprint does actually hit hard on tourism, recreation, and the food is under retail. And we've stood up, based on a new hotel fee, Visit Morgan Hill T-Bid, that's funded at $400,000 a year to go market these things. And Chris sits on that board, Chris Gioni does. It's just in formulation. I mean, you haven't seen anything yet, but so, you know, when I heard this, I said to Michelle next to me, I said, basically, T-Bid, do your job. It's kind of really what that is. There's an arts element. Also want to talk about income for our residents. There's one problem with all of these jobs. They pay terribly. They're okay businesses to own if you're one of the successful ones, but you go talk to the average person that lives in Napa, their life is really hard if they're not the wealthy people that came there to buy their $100 million retirement bill. For the people that are working at their villas, life is really hard. So we have to think about that too. So it's an element of a strategy, but you would not be happy. The majority of people in Morgan Hill would not be happy if we became 100% tourism, recreation, arts, and food economy. That is not a great economy for.
But I think that. What I want to say is that we need to look at it in terms of how are these cities who do make a lot of money from these particular markets, how are they doing it? How do they survive? And I'm not talking about people coming and staying in hotels. You know, I'm talking about, say, advertising. When people think about winery regions, hey, you come to San Jose,
Yeah.
you wanna buy some California wines,
And-
come to Morgan Hill. It's like,
I agree, absolutely. That's not the city's job, that is the wine association's job, which does a lot of work on that, and that is Visit Morgan Hill's job, which is being funded very well. So I agree with you, but I'm saying as far as what does the city of Morgan Hill need to do and have the funding to do and have as its job, that's really not primarily city government's job. The city government's job are these other
but I
areas.
guess my point is that we can say no, but let's look at it. Let's look and see how these cities who do survive.
And I'm inviting you to go to the meetings where people do that every month.
Fine.
I'm not trying to be a smart aleck about it, but really, there is a lot of work going, and part of maybe what this community and the broader community needs to know, is there is a lot of work going on there and more that can be done. And then just to Kathy's point, we were an ag community. As an economy, we're not. It's single-digit percentages of our local economy. That doesn't mean I'm against it, but as far as messaging, as far as bringing revenue into City Hall to pay so that we can all have this nice building to be in, ag isn't gonna get that done. So, you know, there's this romantic feeling for it. I love going to the pumpkin patch as much as anybody. I've got some walnut trees on my property.
You ignore the reality of the cities who are doing quite well with these things. I really feel that we need to look at it and look and see who's successful.
I agree. I'm just saying that.
I don't know how much money it would bring in, but, you know.
I don't disagree with you.
Yeah.
I really don't. I'm really not trying to start.
And there are people that do that, and there's a small percentage of time of our economic development team spent on this. That's not where the dollars are, but it's not being ignored.
So the takeaway that I got from economic development was that the team involved at the city level was tasked to find how we can get money into the community. And through their research and all of those things, they are zeroing in on tech and larger businesses. Delmonico Foods,
Sunbasket has, Sunbasket.
Yeah, Sunbasket.
Okay, now, and I don't disagree with Yvonne because I sat on one of the original tourism committees and that started, what, 8 years ago? I mean, we've recognized the value of that we have, but the city also recognizes that in order to take care of a $7 million shortfall, we have to go and find businesses that will bring in more dollars to our operating budget, like the hotels, like the tech businesses. And they don't have to be Apple and they don't have to be Google. They can be the smaller tech businesses that want a smaller campus and they can't find one because Google and Apple and Facebook have taken everything in the north.
We love Paramount.
Just to also comment, this number is getting closer to $10 million.
Yeah.
So somewhere between $7 and $10 million, because SB 330 is creating more of a shortfall.
I just, if you want to move, I'll get there, like, that's one of the.
Let's keep going down, and this is good, healthy dialogue, and I'm gonna be playing devil's advocate, because, of course, I've got the factual information in my head, and I wanna make sure that, and if we don't understand the facts, then we've gotta figure out what makes sense. So go ahead, Caitlin.
Yeah, so I'm really proud of our group because we got through every category and we really focused on if we had one thing, if we're going out to the community and we have one thing we want to tell people, nobody is going to really get into the nitty-gritties of, but this is the one thing I want you to know about all these categories, so keeping that in mind, that's kind of where our group came from. So the why do we want to engage Morgan Hill? Because we want factual information out in the community. And the reason we said factual information is because I think there are a lot of people in the community that think they are informed because they are reading next door and they don't know where they're talking to their neighbors that aren't necessarily informed. So the why is, why are we here? We're here because we want factual information out in the community.
The budget, the one thing I wrote down, I was gonna say that, I said Maureen's instructions, and I'm a rule follower, were to take the information we were given we were given a number of $7 million shortfall when we looked at the graph, but because of SB 330 and other things, it's really more than that. So I think at this point, now we're hearing closer to 10 million, so it's more than $7 million a year. So when we talk about the budget, we can get into the nitty-gritties of the how, but what do we want people to know? We want them to know that there's close to $10 million in liabilities, and these aren't wish list things, right? There are things like there are things like pensions, which are non-negotiable liabilities, which we want people to know. That at the end of the day, we don't have a choice of whether or not we're paying these pension numbers. They're liabilities, they're legal liabilities. And they're not numbers that we can go back to the table and say, you know, this is happening. So that's contributing to this number, which is, why do we need factual information out in the committee? Okay, so economic development. We can talk about all of the different aspects of economic development, but the thing that to me is most important from the presentation is that it's a necessary revenue generator, right? This kind of goes back to John's point that the businesses, what brings in money in the community, right? It's not your property taxes. And so economic development, that's Edith's job, is she's looking to see where is the money going to come from? And it's all of these things, right? Like we don't have a good community if we don't have an arts aspect to our community. It all is interconnected and all works together. But the bottom line is when you see construction going around town and you're frustrated because you have to wait longer at a stop sign to let your construction go by because they're building a new building downtown, the point is it's a necessary revenue generator which is going to affect your quality of life. And that's the one thing we want people to know. Infrastructure, and like this was Kathy's. Basically, it's the quality of life that you have in Morgan Hill that you love and enjoy. The recreation, you want less traffic, you want to drive on good roads. At this point, because of all of these things, we need community contribution. That probably has to be a financial contribution, but if you want to continue to enjoy the quality of life that you have enjoyed, the one thing we want people to know is we need the community's help and we need them to get involved. Housing SB 330, if there's one thing that we want the community to know, it's that the state is mandating it.
Yes.
So when you're driving around town, and again, people are upset with the construction, and for me, along with Sally's point, the thing that's most frustrating for me about SB 330 is that in our ability to force the developers to compete, one of the requirements we had was that they build affordable housing. That's how they got more points with us. One of the things that when Steve and I sat on the dais is we said, we don't even want you necessarily just to contribute to an affordable housing fund. We want you to build affordable housing. We want you to put the walls up and say this is an affordable housing unit. Along with the doors are open, they've taken away our ability to do that. So they've taken away our ability to force them to do the affordable housing. So no matter what aspect of SB 330 you're talking about, the point is this is a state mandated issue, and so rather than be at odds with the community on it, we want the community on our team so that we can address the issue together. Because there will be tons of fallout from this, and it's not just financial. It's also because we're going to need more infrastructure and we're going to need more public safety officers because we have a growing population. And part of what we did with our housing ordinance was we said not only are we affecting year by year how many houses can be built, but we also have a goal of what we want our population to be. So that when we were looking at public safety, we said, okay, if we have an idea of where our population's going, then we can grow public safety along with it so that we're sufficiently staffed. Now, we don't have any idea what our population is, how it's gonna boom. So not only does that affect our bottom line here, but it also means that we're gonna need more infrastructure and we're gonna need more public safety officers. So originally I said exactly the same thing. The thing that we need right now is we need to staff that fire station because the fire station is getting built, but we don't have anyone to put in the fire station. But along with that, we don't know what the impacts of the growing population are gonna be on the police department. So we said increase PD and fire staff for growing population. I feel like we get in the weeds later.
Any contradictions, comments, thoughts in relation to what Caitlin shared?
There's a lot of, I don't know who the developers are, but I've been reading that there are builders, there are developers that know how to do what is being mandated. They're mainly up in San Francisco Bay Area, but they are doing it. So just a positive note on that.
Yes, and our housing team works closely with a whole variety of organizations and developers and things to help ensure we have affordable housing, but there's dollars related to all of it, right? And the very effective tool that we had, as Caitlin suggested in the past, to ensure we got affordable housing built, not just that we had dollars put in a fund towards affordable housing, has now been dismantled for us for the next 5 years. So I'm not saying there won't be any affordable housing. We also have
exactly the same thing. The thing that we need right now is we need to staff that fire station because the fire station is getting built, but we don't have anyone to put in the fire station. But along with that, we don't know what the impacts of the growing population are going to be on the police department. So we said increase PD and fire staff for growing population. I feel like we get in the weeds later.
Any contradictions, comments, thoughts in relation to what Caitlin shared?
There's a lot of, I don't know who the developers are, but I've been reading that there are builders, there are developers that know how to do what is being mandated. They're mainly up in San Francisco Bay Area, but they are doing it. So just a positive note on that.
Yes, and our housing team works closely with a whole variety of organizations and developers and things to help ensure we have affordable housing, but there's dollars related to all of it, right? And the very effective tool that we had, as Caitlin suggested in the past, to ensure we got affordable housing built, not just that we had dollars put in a fund towards affordable housing, has now been dismantled for us for the next 5 years. So I'm not saying there won't be any affordable housing. We also have mandates for affordable housing. And even though we've done an excellent job of providing affordable housing, one of the areas that's most challenging for all communities is the very, very low affordable housing. And so, and there's penalties and fees that the city will have to pay if we cannot produce the supply of affordable housing at all the right levels. And the one for us that's challenging is that very, very low.
Yeah. And then I think the RDA money and the RDS money that was taken away was because we were not doing it the way the state wanted us to do it.
Well, that was across the
No,
board.
actually.
We wanted the money for education.
Specific to Morgan Hill.
No, I'm talking across the board.
Across the states.
Yeah.
And I guess there's different opinions on that. The redevelopment agency money was used very effectively in Morgan Hill towards both affordable housing and also helped us develop all of our recreation resources in some of the areas that were quote a bit more blighted or didn't have that available. And RDCS, our growth control, which is a voter-approved growth control system that's been in place in Morgan Hill for over 40 years, that's gone by the wayside now too with SB 330. And that also helped us do affordable housing.
It did. We were one of the few cities in the state who our housing and our RDCS kept us in compliance every single year. We mandated it as a city to the people who were doing development, single and whatnot, so that if there was a 50-house development, there was some element of it that had to be guaranteed to be low income, not, I won't say low, but affordable housing. And so what the city's done, what the state's done with 330 is penalize Morgan Hill.
Yeah. Well, we just got stuck where everybody else wasn't doing their job.
Some of the other kids misbehaved and we all got,
Yes.
and we all got a pension.
And
Life is not fair.
for those of you who were here for that presentation, Leslie Little, mentioned how hard Morgan Hill's team worked going to our state legislators to see if we could carve out things that would make more sense for a community like Morgan Hill, and it was not met with agreeable legislation, let's put it that way. Which other group has not shared anything? Because we're going to wrap this up in a minute here. Over here? Here? Did you want to?
Go get a record.
Okay, so we talked about why we're here, and one of the things we said, kind of motherhood and apple pie, but quality of life. And really where we're going is we enjoy a quality of life today. We want to retain that quality of life. Obviously, the budget is going to be an issue with maintaining that quality of life. We also said right kind of development. I mean, the hotels, for example, are a right kind of development. It really does good for the general fund. I've got my own little story here, and that's really distribution center. I don't want 18-wheelers on our roads. So that's one thing I'm fighting for. But we need economic development, absolutely. It just has to be the right kind of economic development. And Don, why don't you talk about trade-offs and active discussion relative to the budget?
So I've been participating in goal setting and budget hearings for about 6 years. And one of the things that I would like to see changed is the city comes out and says, we have already decided where we're going to spend the money, and these are the desires of the departments. What we don't hear are what didn't make the cut, what was just below the line, what other priorities might be involved. Last year, 2 organizations, Civic Theater and Grange, came and said, we would really like some help, and the city council, given that opportunity to have the discussion, said, we can take some money from a landscaping project and give it to these 2 organizations. So, and maybe we get to this at the very end of this meeting where Maureen lets us know about the goal setting session in January. The other thing that doesn't happen is that I have argued for converting a part-time to a full-time employee in older adult services. And the response I got from the city manager was, well, that would be a more complicated, longer-term discussion. What was not included in that response is how, when, or even if we would ever have that kind of discussion in terms of priorities. So my sense is we really don't, as residents, have much say in the budget and what's in it and how it gets developed. And that was my little soapbox speech on trade-offs and active involvement in the budget.
And I think, to your point, Doug, that's fair. And think of how much time and effort we've spent over the last several months just trying to kind of establish a baseline knowledge before even digging into the details of the budget. And it would be awesome if we could be out in the community having all those conversations with our community about all these different decision points. It's probably not realistic that all those discussions are going to happen out in the community. You're paying your city staff to hopefully have some expertise in the community and the different areas they work in and make some of those suggestions, well, in some cases making the actual decisions, and in other cases making the recommendations to council for council to make the decision. However, we are hoping in this process that we're gonna have a lot more of that. And we're hoping that at least some of you will be able to attend the goal-setting workshop and be actively a part of this whole budget development process, so that things like you're saying right there are discussed, and share whether you think that's the best use of funds. One more thing. When community groups come before council and present thoughts and ideas in the midst of, I think those ideas came up actually at the budget workshop when we were developing the budget. By that point, there may have been lots of internal discussions, which yes, you're right. Does the whole community know about all those internal discussions? Absolutely not. Would they pay attention? I don't know. Could we Facebook Live them all? Perhaps. I don't know. There's a, you're talking about a lot of nitty gritty discussion that probably would be a little boring for most. But then we're talking about our elected officials making decisions in that moment based upon what they have heard from staff, based upon what they understand about the budget, and the fact that they've got, community organizations that we know. There's so many wonderful community organizations in Morgan Hill, and they're asking for money. It doesn't sound like a lot of money in comparison to our grand budget, but anyway, very good point though, and I hope that we're going to be able to address some of that through this. A lot will be dependent on who's willing to be involved. Doug, you are awesome in terms of your willingness to come to meetings, to keep yourself informed and educated, read all the volumes of material, and most people... And write, yes, and write, and provide your input. The majority of our population doesn't do that. Sometimes it's because I honestly think they're satisfied with life, and other times it's just you're too busy. If you have food over, on your plate and a house or a roof over your head, and you're employed, and it's working. Sometimes people don't have time to go any further than that. Okay, anything else from that group?
Did
John?
the mayor want to?
Yeah.
Oh, that's right, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, you made all the points I was gonna make, but I'm looking around this room and I see Ava and I see Kathy, and when they came, they got what they wanted. They worked on it awful hard.
That's right.
But where are the people? They just don't show up.
I understand, but it's just my personal frustration.
Yeah.
Well, and
But
This time around-
going forward,
but this time
what's a
around-
reasonable expectation of the impact that people can have?
absolutely. Well, and I think in this whole conversation, those kinds of things need to be discussed. But it needs to come from the community to say, while we love, making sure we have dollars that go to a shelter for our animals and things like that, or whatever, in looking at this whole picture, is that really where the dollars should go? Should they go to the Grange, which is an awesome resource for our community, that as a meeting room that is pretty affordable to rent, that provides a lot of opportunity for our community to gather. It's been in the community for a long time. It's a historical building. It's like, those are all those things that ultimately our council has to balance and staff has to closely look at as we're making our own recommendations. So I totally agree with you, Doug, and I hope this process makes it better. It's probably not going to get to the point that you're suggesting, but hopefully it's better. John?
I'll respond quickly to what Doug said, and thanks for bringing it up. I've sometimes said, and I'll say it again, you can't act rich and cry poor. And so as far as the community grant process, if the city is going to have grants to, beloved nonprofits, that, in my opinion, should not happen by just knowing which meeting to show up at and raise your hand and pull heartstrings, and you get from the dais, a reallocation of city funds. I'll pick on your brain. I'm nothing, but that, I sat there and this is a really peculiar process to get a large dollar grant. Who knows who they talk to ahead of time and whatnot, but I would strongly encourage our electeds and our city staff not to do community grants that way by, you come to every meeting, we see it, we love it, yeah, we'll find $100,000 because we know you need it. That's what I call acting rich. It's like, I got all kinds of resources. Yeah, I love you, Merry Christmas. And then
Just for clarification, this is live and video.
Yeah.
I don't think we gave the Grange anywhere near $100,000.
I'm sorry, I should.
Correct?
No.
Yeah, so just,
Actually, we have not given the Grange any money because we've never finished, we had an agreement working on parking and stuff, but it's never moved to fruition. So the Grange has not received any money.
Yeah, and
from
just-
the
I agree.
As we're
So I
talking
didn't know that. I just, think as, and I was pulling numbers out of my head, which I shouldn't have done. But still, this, in terms of the process, that's as a member, as a close observing member of the public, that's a really strange way for whatever community dollars are going to be given out. That by appearances. So we talk about what we want people to know. I'm suggesting we also probably want to change how that's communicated. If there's going to be some fund for community grants for historical infrastructure or whatever, that should be the budget item, and then the process, sort of like we've done for public events. There's a little budget, and for a couple of the public events, and people apply, and there's a formal process for that. Anyway, that's not good.
Okay, 1 second, and then Kathy, I want to go to you, but I just want to say, I want to wrap this piece of today up at 10:30 so that we can see the demo. So I'm considering this kind of our Q&A. Is that good? Because it's a good, healthy discussion. Go ahead, Kathy.
What I want to add to that whole thing, and I think a lot of these requests started with the Historical Society's request for funding from the city, and then you saw other groups coming and saying, we want money. First of all, the Villa Miramonte site is a city obligation. Actually, the city owns the title to that property, transferred to somebody who can be a steward for it. But if the entity that's not taking care of that property cannot do that, the city, it reverts back to the city. It's the city's obligation to keep that national historical site open to the public for educational and community benefit in perpetuity. So given that, and given that the City Council adopted preserving our community history as an ongoing priority to both John and other points, I think that's what's missing, is the city needs the policy behind that. What do we preserve? How do we preserve it? And then it comes back to the funding. If you're going to provide funding for some entity, what's the benefit or the obligation of the city to maintain that? So that's one point. And then I just quickly want to go back to this sort of overall thing. I think the umbrella statement here is if you live in Morgan Hill, you love your community, the model for sustaining that community is going to have to change. So we've got to figure out what we need to do to educate the community and get them engaged. And I think that's the biggest challenge. And what their contribution has to be going forward, because it cannot be sustained based on funding from other entities that don't impact us personally. So I think when we go out to the community, it's the bullet points under each of those. How do I find out the factual information? How do I get engaged? And what does it mean to me from the standpoint of personal contributions?
I think that's a great summary, Kathy, because I think we're getting to that reality. Mm-hmm. If you love this community, if you love our way of life here, it's not sustainable going into the future. And there's different ways that can be looked at, but bottom line, something's going to change. Mm-hmm. Either people are going to have to be willing to pay more for what they receive, or it's very likely that we won't be able to provide the level of service that our community, or the amenities that our community has become very used to. I mean, many people come here because of the beautiful things we have to offer as a community, which gets to the quality of life issue. Okay, this group here, did you have anything else to say in terms of what you put up here?
No, other than just reiterating what's already been said. I think the factual information is key. We also felt that we need to find a way for people who use Nextdoor and those kinds of places to be a little more objective when they start listening to what we are going to be saying, because a lot of what we're going to be saying will not agree with what they've heard. And we have to be careful not to be viewed as rubber stamping city staff.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So, I mean, that's when we get around to that, then the factual information will be the hardest thing we've ever done. Because people really don't want facts. They want the bias. Go ahead.
Maybe we need a mission statement.
I like that.
The tagline.
Just the facts, man.
Is that trademarked by that old TV show?
I'm just gonna make sure that that is wrapped. Jody?
I think just one thing I'll add to, as far as with, SB 230, because just as far as housing, for instance, when under the RDCS, I know when in Memorial Hill 2035, which is going to be a moratorium anyway, but I know before we voted that there could be extensions for projects and funding. So people get all upset, like, why are all these buildings taking place now? I thought we had something in place, and people didn't realize, well, it's happening now because they were given an extension for their allocations because there wasn't funding. So now people might think, well, why is the city allowing all this building? I thought we have a law. Because unfortunately, a lot of people, they are just, I'll use the word clueless. And even though I know the city's already done a good job sending out things about SB 330, I think it's going to be something we'll have to continue over and over and over and over again. So people realize, like the other group said, it's state mandated. We have no choice. And so that's something I think that will be good to continue to put that out over and over again in these coming years.
Yep, all of this stuff is going to have to be a continual, ongoing message, and that is why we desperately need all of you and some of the people who aren't here to be willing to have those conversations with the people you interact with in the community, your friends, your neighbors, to be willing to figure out ways we can connect, because you saying it and understanding it is far, far more powerful than the city sharing information. And, I can share out information, and as most of you know, I do, till I'm blue in the face and can't spell right anymore and can't, edit anything because I've looked at it so many millions of times. And while sometimes I have wonderful engagement with people, a lot of times, oh yeah, there's more stuff from Maureen, too much information, too much to read, and way more powerful if it comes from all of you. I want to just quickly draw your attention to one of your handouts, which is, oh, I'm sorry, Nick.
I just would just like maybe to add to Sunday, this is a wonderful summary, this is a great exercise to go through, and this positive reflect back really why we were all here, and what we're really kind of hopefully challenging charters to do. And I'm a visual learner, so it's hard for me to not go up that board and kind of rearrange that board. But I do agree, I think we're at kind of a junction, and you're right, well, as a group, we have to really come to terms with the mission statement, who we are. And I think the overall goal can be this trusted source of factual information for our community. And my perspective has always been that we want to be this catalyst for the community that can be trusted as far as not only factual information, but to be neutral based. And if our mission really is to inform, to educate, and then to engage, maybe that first year when we can do collectively together, that should be the goals that we should strive to do. We're not going to solve all these issues, nor should we. But we can inform and educate so the community is much better informed of information to be able to have greater depth at the different venues that we have. So what I would suggest is we take this body of work and we restructure the work. Now we take that next pivot point and we start with the why in the middle, right? And then you have your connectors of each one of these different verticals that really translate to the single messages that we have on the board today.
Sounds like a mind map to me.
Well, yeah, it really could be. It's hard for me to sit, but I will go up here and really try to board. It's just my nature. But I think if we start at that centering core and we develop who we are, we become this trusted source. So whether you're on this community website or that community website, eventually, over time, we have to be a trusted source of information that the community will move towards as far as information. That will allow greater support at the various meetings, the budget meeting, the city councils, etc. So I can see this body of work actually settling down to a couple of those key messages, but it starts with the why, right? And now we have to just decide how we can campaign that to become that trusted source over the next several months. Because for me, the first several months was really an immersion of education on really what it may look like to be able to pull this together. And now it's our efforts to be able to kind of take that forward. So I really see this kind of as a reciprocal model where you've got the leadership and you've got our residents that really is a dyad model. We want to be that catalyst to exchange information so then better decisions can be made, having input from the group as a whole. That's
It sounds really good, Nick. And that is exactly what we're hoping that you're all going to be willing to do. I mean, it's a big ask. And we're not like, okay, great, we've provided all this information, go do it. We're here to help support the process all along, but a lot of it will need all of you to jump in and be a part of that. I want to just call your attention to this handout. It's got very, very, very small font. I apologize for that. That's the way it looks. Because it's a red line version or a track changes. And this was the beginning draft of trying to distill down the information that had been presented at that point. It goes through infrastructure, so it's, I keep doing this is dangerous. I'm going to break my other foot as I'm still healing the one. Doesn't include housing, doesn't include public safety. Yvonne took a lot of time and effort in this. Amy Whalen, who is a community member, but she's been doing some part-time project work for us, assisted, and Jennifer, I know, weighed in a little bit on this. We want to continue with this, and after this conversation, I think a lot of this can help to inform this as well. But any comments, questions? We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but I wanted to, sure, yes.
I sent this out to a lot of people, a lot of friends.
Oh, awesome.
Number one thing that came back was, I'm glad you gave me this thing, Yvonne, but I didn't read it. I don't have time to read it.
Yeah.
And the other thing that came out was what I've been hearing in the news, is the large amount of distrust that people have in their local government. And I just want to remind people here in the room is that our best asset is that the people that we talk to trust us and trust our thinking. So I don't think we have to come across a mission statement. We just have to be willing to talk to everyone we know about each of these subjects, because people just, nobody read this. And I spent so much time on it. So.
Well, and that's a really good point. Somehow we have to turn all of this fun stuff into more graphical representations. And using infographics today seems to be much more desirable in terms of people being receptive to looking at it. It takes some time and effort, which is where on the city side we can provide some resource. We have to agree though on what we're trying to share and what are the most meaningful graphic images and things like that, and what are in the fewest amount of words can we get across the message we're trying to, with then ways for people who want to dig in and understand. Well, we've got a lot of good resource of information now, so if we can come up with the very summarized bullets and interesting, engaging images to go with it, we've got all the detail now. It's ready, it's on the website. If someone wants to dig in, they definitely can. So thank you, Yvonne. But we need to go forward with.
When we do the graphs, are you planning to put those up or send those to people, those graphics? When we come up with it, what are we gonna do with it?
So what we need is something that is easy. One, I would say there's two things. This type of thing hopefully comes down to what each of you has as your talking points, your things to remind you what the key points are, so that when you're having that conversation, it's a reminder to you. I wouldn't suggest that something like this is something we're going to distribute out in the community. It's more for your personal reference, so that you're not trying to sift through all the volumes of information that we've provided, or going back and looking at hours and hours of video, which is there and it's available, and now and then that's worthwhile. We probably want a few key pieces. I'll call them marketing pieces, for lack of a better word. That's not really what I mean though. But a few, pardon?
That is what you mean.
Okay. Marketing can sound like a dirty word.
No, it's not.
But something that shares information in an engaging way. A few key pieces in the marketing world, you call it collateral, that is branded, connected to the city of Morgan Hill, connected to the Engage Morgan Hill process, and looks appealing. It looks attractive. You wanna look at it. You wanna look at both sides, or if it's a 4-page pamphlet type of thing, you actually want to. And we've got excellent examples of it. They're not cheap to produce, I will tell you that, and so we won't do the probably shiny, glossy versions of things, but there's ways to do it that are less expensive than others. And so we probably need a couple pieces like that.
Can you insert it into the Trader Joe's Fearless flyer that we all read?
I don't read that. I look at it and go, they didn't need to mail it to me. Sorry, Nancy. But no, I mean, and figure out, are there creative places we could have things inserted? Or is it things that, somehow are distributed door to door in conversations, kind of like, a campaign where people actually go out and talk? Yes?
Well, I think it's really key. We're jumping into defining what marketing strategy would be most impactful and effective, and how to present snippets of the most important information. So somebody could look at a digital communication and in 20 seconds, 5 seconds, whatever it is, understand very quickly what, why, when, and why I should care to even spend any more time on it. Or if something is important to me, why I would double click that. So I think that part of this process is exactly what Nick was saying. Bubble everything up. Nobody's going to read this. I mean, a few people will, and that's great if it's clicked into, for example, but bubble everything up, just the process you've been taking us through. Define a marketing subset of people, help define a marketing strategy, work with the team to actually implement that strategy, and see what responses come, and then you take it to the next level.
Okay. I'm gonna, one more comment? I really want to get into our balancing act demo, because part of what we want, there's a couple different agendas in all of this. We want people to be engaged in the budget process and understand. And the comments that John and Doug both have made, we want those things to come up as a part of the process, not to be thrown out on the day we're doing a budget workshop with council. We want to provide those opportunities. One of the ways we think that may help with that is this balancing act tool, which has been used in many other communities, which gets people into these, this quandary of, I know I want more police officers and firefighters. They cost a lot of money, and they already take up a huge amount of our general fund. And wow, I go back to the other side. It's like, what can I cut out to fund more of this within the general fund? And then you can say, well, let's do it with all recreation. Well, recreation has a huge revenue component to it. The small amount that the general fund supports is tiny compared to the revenue. If we got rid of recreation and the small amount that we would also be getting rid of a huge revenue stream and something that is serving our community and really in many ways contributes to public safety in Morgan Hill just as much as police and firefighters do. But anyway, this tool, so let's not talk anymore, let's just get Harjot up here. Are you okay doing that?
Yeah, I'm actually gonna, that's.
And I think I have a link, I don't know if it's the link you want.
No. Maybe we can take a minute, 2 minute break if everybody wants to use the restroom while I get this set up. Good idea.
I don't have a very good whistle. All right, you guys all remember Harjot Singh, correct? Yes. Our assistant to the city manager and comes from a finance background, used to be in our finance area. And he's going to share with you a demo of Balancing Act.
Yeah, so what I'm going to do is just kind of start back with the budget and kind of highlight the key elements, what we're talking about, and how it all is going to translate into this tool called a balancing act. What the tool really does is it allows community members like yourself, others, and staff to really, one, kind of scenarios both on the expense side as well as the revenue side in real time and make those recommendations and submit those to city staff, council, that can extract that on the back end and present it to the council and ensure this is what the community has voiced. We should allocate either more resources to, less resources to, or find ways or to, find additional sources of revenues to fund those additional needs and so forth. Just circling back to our general fund discretionary, highlighting key takeaways from the budget presentation. I think one of the key takeaways is that there's different pots of money, if you will, that the city has, and those dollars can only be spent on certain types of projects, types of initiatives that those funds are allocated for. General fund primarily is where the community, the council has the most discretion over. And what are those items? For the current fiscal year, it's about $30 million, or 69% of the general fund. And what are those programs? Just highlighting again, it's public safety, police, fire. We allocate some to infrastructure and maintenance, administration, which includes city council, general city government, as far as city manager, city attorney, finance, HR, and a few others are included in that, as well as our recreation and community services. General fund does support those programs as well. So just wanted to remind everybody that it's the general fund is primarily the fund that the citizens, the council has the most discretion over, and what we will be modeling in the balancing act will be primarily for those dollars in the general fund. So with that, I'm going to jump into, there's 3 examples that I'll be switching back and forth from. Our neighboring city to the north, city of San Jose initially, also used this tool. And I'll go ahead and kind of walk you through the process. So up top here essentially is what you're trying to solve for. It's indicating currently for City of San Jose, they're in the deficit of about $10 million. For us, the numbers primarily very similar as far as our needs go, but for us, we have not built those needs into our budget. This tool will allow us to run those scenarios. If we wanted to include the public safety component, what would that do to the general fund? And I think we've seen a graph illustration of it, but what this allows you to do is, real-time play with those public safety numbers, talk about infrastructure, and see what the impacts are going to be in real time. So 2 sides here. On the right side is the spending or the expenses, and each of these programs are indicated there, what the general fund is spending on, what the dollar amounts is, and if you drill down on it, it further goes into what divisions within public safety exist. For us, very similar, it will be police field services. We learned about, at the last meeting, special ops, we have dispatch. For fire, we have our fire operations, we have the CAL FIRE contract, we have our debt service on our apparatus and our fire stations and so forth. So within, for San Jose, what they have indicated is, so once the base budget gets loaded into this tool, city staff, with your feedback, we will design scenarios of questions that will get loaded into this tool for community to provide the feedback. For example, one is what level of funding should be given to the police patrol? For San Jose, if a community member felt that they're doing exceptionally well, I think we can cut back on police patrol. What does that really mean? So if we were to large funding reduction, what that indicates is out of their 204 million budget, they would probably reduce $10.2 million. What does that do? Right away, that $10 million that they previously had a deficit of gets washed away by just doing that one action. Or how do you get rid of the deficit? It's really a multi-pronged approach. We want to, not a large, but maybe a small funding gap. So if we were to illustrate a small funding reduction, instead of the $10 million, it's now going to be the $5 million. And then that decreases the deficit to from 10 to about 4.9. Further going into, okay, so maybe public safety, that's the only change that the person would want to recommend in public safety. Further going into community and neighborhood services, park maintenance. What level of funding should be given to parks, maintenance and operations? Well, I think, the parks need some work. I actually want to increase that. And we, as staff working with each of the department heads, will define what that number really means. For example, we could set this up in a way, is it really additional staffing plus related operating costs that we would staff up? What does that really mean? For San Jose, it really means $1.2 million. It could be a whole new unit that gets created to upstaff and provide park maintenance services. On the reduction side, what does that really mean if we were to say, well, I want to reduce it? So that whole unit that we just added, if we were to reduce maintenance services, what does that really mean? We can't really eliminate one FTE. We would have to eliminate a program within a park maintenance. So what does that really mean? It could be a unit could be considered 3 FTEs plus the related a truck, operating cost, gas, fuel, etc. So we're going to eliminate that one unit, and that equals to the $1.2 million. So those are the approaches that staff's going to be discussing and designing these scenario questions based off of.
So when you click on the little eye, does it tell you what you just read?
Yeah, so the I is additional information. So it'll say what is the purpose
like
of
under
use.
small funding reduction, what does that I say? Does
So-
that say we use verbalized? Add people or reduce?
Right. So this would be where all that would be indicated. So for them, it's a 5% increase in the budget allocations, increases capacity to improve health and safety of playgrounds, and where it would be essentially allocated, right? And then you can get more detailed. What does that really mean?
So that
Talks
gets
about the
into what you
FTEs,
verbalized.
exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So all this would be good point. Thank you for pointing that out. The I's is where additional details pertaining to that scenario question would be indicated. And then.
So is this a program any city can buy, and then do they cater it based on you, or you have to fill in the?
So it's a subscription based, so cities basically pay for a subscription of the tool, but after that it's individually catered, designed by the cities for their intended use. So each city essentially uses it.
How much what's the subscription fee?
I believe it's a little over $6,000 annually is the subscription that they
Someone's
essentially.
making money. It's very tiny font, can you zoom in?
Can't see it, and then
Let's see if I can
Thank
do
you.
this. Perfect. All right. So, and then essentially once you have made a recommendation, what you can also do is you can also provide comments. I'd like to increase small funding increases. You've indicated X, Y, Z in the details. However, I would like to see an increase, if and when you do consider this, please consider this part or this area of the city.
So I'm assuming that this is going to be sent out to residents, and then when is that going to happen?
So this, we're currently setting this up. We're hoping to get this up and out to the community by end of February, when we have more of a recommended current services budget ready from the departments, which essentially what we call is a base budget. And then anything above and beyond would be these scenarios now. Here's what it would cost us today, and then we're hoping to make this available February. It could be sooner, depending on our budget schedule, which is still also in development phase right now.
We're hoping to be able to share it with all of you before we share it out with the community at large, but it'll be very close in proximity because we'd really like this group to play around with it in a very concerted effort, but it will be available to the whole community.
And then quickly, so those are the types of things, scenarios, initiatives that we would, have on the spending side for what does it really mean for Morgan Hill? I think easily what we can say is, let's get down to our. So
You got all that, right?
What can you expect on, what are some of the scenarios for Morgan Hill? It's essentially going to be staff, or our staff's going to basically look at this general fund need and then present these as questions to the community. Well, we've identified this $7 million, now 7 to 10. What are your priorities? What would you like to see included in the next biennial budget? For police services, one could say, I want to allocate the 1.3 right away in the current biennial budget. For fire services, I think our priority could be that we need to build a fire station and then maybe allocate the 2.3 in the second year, or begin to incrementally staff up that. Whatever those scenarios are going to be, we want to take care of our streets right away in this biennial budget. We want to allocate XYZ dollars to that.
Then Marjotte, if I could just remind everybody, this $7 million currently is not built in to the budget. But remember, I don't know, it's easy to get to the chart that shows, if we start building those in, that's where we get this projection of the shortfall. These things are not currently in our budget. We know we need them, we think we need them, but that's where the shortfall comes from.
All right, and then going over to the revenue side, I think San Jose's is pretty much locked in, so I'm going to head over to another example. So here's a good example for this is Baltimore County's current property tax. The rate, it talks about how it's currently generated, what it means, and then it proposes, should we consider an increase in property tax? What does that really mean? Increase in real property tax rate of $1.15 per $100 of assessed values. If we were to highlight that, it tells us that it's going to generate $42 million for this entity, right? Property taxes in California are obviously, very restricted with the Prop 13. Maybe, that's not a option for us. Maybe an option for us would be more of, a sales tax or a service tax, or an additional fee for, I think fire was brought up by somebody earlier today. We don't have a fee for fire. Maybe if we want to increase services in fire, one of the things we would recommend or include in here would be, what does that fee really look like? What does that fee look like as far as moving forward, and what kind of services we would enhance in areas of fire right away. So another example here, what would happen if we were to increase the income tax rate by income tax rate to 3.2? By clicking that, we're able to see right away it would generate $94 million. And then up top is really where you see now you have a surplus of 55. Okay, great. I'm willing to pay a little bit more of income tax. Now I have the surplus. Where do I want to spend the money? So, then you go into, I want to go into public schools.
I know you had a question back here.
Sorry, go ahead.
So is this something you use in your office, or it's more to engage with the community?
This is more to engage with the community because just going back, we're having this meeting, and I'll use this group as an example. I think a lot of great ideas rise out of the group, and then how are we able to model those? Essentially, and today, if we wanted to, we would probably say, we'll come back to you at another meeting, and then illustrate what that impact is to the general. What this tool allows us to do is essentially build some of that in increments. Say a 1% increase in property taxes or sales tax. We're able to click it right away. Right away, it'll tell us what that dollar amount is going to be. Now we want to talk about spending. Where do we want to allocate it? it provides a visual and a real-time illustration.
Nancy, a lot of it is so that we're not trying to have the community digest a bunch of spreadsheets.
Right,
Where
exactly.
all these formulas are built in, and that's what the finance folks and our internal team are looking at, and some graphs and things, but yeah, this is, and it's to get a sense of the totality of it. You know, it's easy to talk about, you know, I'm for police and fire, but when you start really looking at what that means, you know, and then if we increase, with nothing else changing, if we increase police and fire services, by default, something absolutely has to go away. And so what would that be? Well,
when we came here in '96, the city was still reeling from having to lay off so many people because the funds just weren't there. So what you mentioned was potential for a fire safety fee as opposed. I, as a taxpayer, would just as soon pay a fee if it means that fire department can get to my house within 5 to 10 minutes and that police department can get to my house in less time, because it doesn't have to carry big apparatus, it's just one car.
I think what Harjot is actually meaning, though, is a type of tax. You could
Right.
call it a fee. Fire services typically aren't a fee for service, although I don't think we've ever.
What I wanted to know is, do you have any models of cities that do that?
I just know of one. I think Contra Costa Fire District has one. It's not 100% fee based. It's a parcel tax. Some component of their revenue is a direct billing to the citizen that did the call out. So not anybody. So parcel tax would be everybody pays that rate.
Just to be clear, I was not suggesting fee for service fire.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to just clarify, when we use the word fee versus tax,
Right.
it might be used interchangeably. What we're talking about is like a fire district, which would have a specific tax associated with it.
That's
For
what I'm
fire.
I think one of the things, just to your point on people, it might not be people, because the way I think Harjot's gonna set this up is, you can change this service, but you might say, I'm not gonna do this service anymore. Like, take for example, maybe we're gonna close the senior center and save that money so we can. I'm not saying we're doing that, I'm saying it for.
Then you should do that.
But to that point, those are the kind of questions you're gonna get to in this, and you'll see that if you can do that, then you can add one police officer, something to that extent, right? So you're gonna be able to balance those things, and I think that's the value in this whole piece.
Judd?
So there are two ways to use a tool like this. It appears that you allow people to create a budget that has a deficit. Some other agencies have put in the requirement that it's constrained. You can only spend the money you have.
Right.
And that's a somewhat different approach. Now, maybe, you know, people here will say, well, I should be a good citizen, a good resident, and create a balanced budget. But, you know, I really want more money for parks, you know, so anyway, if you're going to allow deficits, that really is a different mindset, in my opinion, of how you use the tool. And if you say it's constrained, you can't spend more money than you have.
Right, and this tool allows that. It has the capability of us including, and I don't have a good example for it, but essentially, as you're clicking through and you want to say, I want to hit this plus, I want to add dollars, and there, in this example, it's $655,000. When you hit that plus, we have the ability to say, okay, well, we're already in a deficit. How do you intend to pay for this related increase? And then the option would be, on the revenue side, let's increase the property tax by 1%, or income tax, or sales tax, etc.
On the revenue side, do you have options other than rates? Like, did you have an option successfully attract another car dealer?
Well,
no, seriously, I mean, several meetings ago, we talked about kind of where we're going. If we're not going somewhere that creates a $10 million solution long-term, then we're not really doing the job. So, and you're not gonna get to a $10 million solution with a 1/4-cent sales tax and a fire district fee.
Agreed.
Just for example, just, you
Right.
know, hypotheticals, it's gonna take a lot of different pieces of the puzzle. So under the revenue side, can you include some of these other pieces of the puzzle like you do when you're doing budgeting as a communication tool? I keep trying to think of the end game. The end game is next November asking for something, but there's no something that's $10 million.
Right.
So, anyhow, so how much flexibility do you have on the revenue side of the sorts of things you can include as options?
Well, I mean, while we'd love to be able to get down to that level of detail, but I think realistically, going back to our factual information, what do we really have control over? We'd love to have a new car dealership, but who's gonna be willing to come into town and do the legwork? It's not a factual information tangible for us to build into the budget because it doesn't exist today. What we do have is we can say sales tax. If we were to, the people of Morgan Hill, have the right to put on a ballot, and we can do that, and we can increase the sales tax by a 1/4. What does that really mean as dollar-wise? We'd love to have another 2 hotels, but is the market really going to support 2 hotels here or 4 hotels, 5 years from today? So I think we would deviate on a nice to have versus what our real true ability is on those revenues. But can we model this? We can definitely model that, but I just don't know how valuable. Then we might have, TOT, yes, we want to have 2 additional hotels, we want to have a car dealership. In the next 2 years, is that really possible?
Well, at one point you had modeled into the budget that a car dealer was gonna happen that fell aside.
Yes.
So if you can model something you expect, you can model something you currently don't expect.
We can certainly model it, John. The challenge is our community members, well, that's not completely true. So community members do have influence. I mean, it's something to think about. In terms of something like this, we can't say Morgan Hill voters and residents go out and find us a car dealership, right? We did, and then we had a second car dealership that was interested as well, and then the parent company said, no, you're not moving to Morgan Hill. So even though we may be having those conversations and trying to attract it, there's a lot of variables. One thing the community does need to think about is we do know how much revenue or projected revenue hotels can bring into the community. When the community goes out and referends something that's been approved by the city council, so that now we waited, a whole year? Or close to that for this to be on the ballot in March. That's going out to the voters now. Is that the way we want hotels to be decided in Morgan Hill? I don't know. But while those are factors we have to consider, even though we may be saying we need more hotels, or our businesses may be saying we need more hotels because we've got business travelers coming in here, there's so many factors, right? The community needs to think about those things, though, when they go out and petition and try and referend things. The community needs to think about it in relation to what image we're projecting when we strongly oppose projects, no offense, before we even know the details. We don't even know for sure on...
Oh, yes, we do.
Okay, thinking as a resident in this moment, I feel like I don't know enough yet to know for sure what it is. But those are things that while it's hard to build into a tool like this because ultimately we don't have firm control over that. If we go with a sales tax,
you also don't have firm control over sales tax because the economy can turn and you don't get the money.
So I think that's right. Just maybe to your point, John, you can put those assumptions in and let people select it. We just need to figure out what is something that's realistic to be able to put in there.
Sure.
And then you're right, you're not going to get to the $10 million in this system, but I don't think we have to get to the $10 million in this system because this shows what we can do based on using the budget, not necessarily what we can do through economic development and other things.
Yeah.
So,
This is a 2-year horizon, right?
Right.
So there are certain things we do know.
Yes.
In March, we'll know, are the hotels going to be here?
Yep.
We know Shoe Palace is building something that's going to generate some property tax. We're probably not going to see anything from Trammell Crow in a 2-year period, I don't think.
Probably not.
So, and anything else beyond that is probably beyond the 2 year.
Well, and I mean, depending what happens over this next 2-year budget cycle, we may be in a very, very different position as we go into the next 2 years.
And, you
And
know,
then,
we're looking at building a building, and it will be 2 years from the day we decide go. You know,
So is this for informing the next budget cycle? Is that the purpose?
this is part of this budget cycle now,
Oh,
yes.
I thought this was just a general engage Morgan Hill. You know, we want to solve the problem long term, right?
Right.
So this
Right,
goal
right.
isn't about long term.
It's, well,
It's about 2 years.
it's about the short term, specifically in relation to this budget, but it is also to get people thinking more in a more informed way, because the decisions we understand that. What?
Her arm's getting really tired.
She's just getting really tired.
No, her arm's getting really
Oh,
tired.
sorry.
So what I was gonna say quickly to sort of synthesize the two sides of this argument is that this is a specific tool that we want people to use to look at this specific budget. So there's certain things that we can and can't build into it. However, part of engage is we're saying we only get people's attention for so long, and we want to John's point, we want to we want to give them the factual information, and we want to give them we want to be educating them while we have their captivated attention. So maybe instead of building it into the tool, there's a section that isn't built into the algorithm but says, what are other ways to increase revenue? Future car dealerships give us X number of dollar in revenue. Hotels give us this amount of
Knowledge-based
dollars, right?
transfer.
So that rather than having it be something that people can control, because we can't control them in the next 2 years, we still, because we have their attention, are educating them and saying, oh, okay, so you get this on February 1st, you're voting in March, you've now seen something that says how many dollars the hotels are gonna bring into our economy, even though it's not something that you can manipulate in this tool.
Right.
Bravo.
I want to just piggyback on Caitlin's comment, because this is very empowering for a person to be able to do this at home.
Yes.
And I think it really promotes engaging, with the city and with the community. Yeah, but on that same topic, I was thinking to myself, okay, maybe at the end you can have like a wish list. I wish this company would come in, or this is what I want to see, or.
Yeah, and I think once we are up and live, again, these are just examples as we're designing all this. We're not just gonna say, here you go. We would plan to meet again so we can introduce the Morgan Hill tool and actually walk you through it so you have a better understanding on as you get to play around.
And maybe I could just, bring us back to some of the original intent of doing this too. Yes, we need the community to be more aware about the projections into the future, what it looks like, that we know we have potential shortfalls. We want the community to be more involved in the budgeting process, and we're right here now at the new 2-year budget development. We also, in that whole awareness, probably a new revenue stream like a tax is part of the solution. It all goes together, and so we're trying to bring the community more actively into all of it, because you can't be successful in going forward with the revenue measure if people don't understand more about the budget and don't understand why there might be shortfalls. Yvonne?
I think this is a great tool to get the word out through our schools. Because the civics classes here, they have a little book, and they get points for actually volunteering activities. And so many parents are involved with their students' homework that I think if we go to the schools and say, here's this assignment, you guys, you all gotta do it, immediately you have some kid at home saying, Mom, what do you wanna do? Do you wanna give up parks, or do you wanna do this? And
That is a great idea. Unfortunately, civics classes are only seniors, high school seniors for the most part. But yeah, no, and we know for certain, and we've been successful with this in recreation on many levels, if the kids understand the message and are engaged in it, and they bring it to their parents, and the parents get on board. So yes, bringing this into the school in different ways, I think is an excellent idea.
No, I love that idea. This happens next Friday. There's a city school liaison committee meeting. I would seriously put this on the agenda to talk about.
Okay.
To talk about the tool. So it's next Friday at 8 or 9 in the morning.
Just a couple of questions, and maybe ahead of your presentation.
Sure.
So I think what will be important is ultimately has to be relevant to the end user. And I love transparency, I love the simulation for the tool itself. My budgeting tool is really nice to be able to real-time, dynamically take a look at the plus deltas when decisions are being made. Will the tool provide somewhat of an executive summary? So individuals would understand, based on these actions, here's the consequences, or here's the pluses, here's the deltas, and here's the ultimate end being of what we've just done utilizing the tool. Because cutting to the chase, it could be a very complicated mechanism to use for many. So unless there's a way to summarize the actions that we're all taking using the tool, I'm just worried that it may lose its relevance. And I don't know if there's a way to embody your final decisions, so you see the pluses and minuses, and you see the consequences to each decision. That way you've got kind of an executive briefing, and oh, this is what we've just done. Yeah, we've gained this, but we've given up this. Unless there's a way to summarize that, I worry that it just gets lost in the tool. Because if we scale this out across a larger community, education is going to be a big part of how to use it. More importantly, what do you get out of it if you spend the time to go through this? So I would just encourage us, if we're designing this, to make sure that there's a way to be able to summarize the actions. Yes. From my perspective is what actions make a difference? What are the plus or deltas of the deltas? Who is impacted? What level of impact? And the same thing with the pluses. And then summarize that so you can understand. If I'm making these trade-offs in budget, this is really what it means. And because what this won't give us is the social or the emotional determinants of what this all means. So unless we pull that together, all it is budget numbers. And I just worry about the perception of we're just looking at numbers again. We're not understanding the value of what it brings to the community. Right. So we have to really tie this together, that's my suggestion. So it's not just a budgeting tool, but it's a way to guide and inform based on greater discussions. And this will allow you to optimize some decisions and take a look at what the budget really means fundamentally. Right. That's my thought. Just going into
I think that's great feedback, and I have taken a note of it, and I'll provide that feedback to the actual tool provider to see if we're able to generate after you do hit a submit button, provide you a executive level summary. I know that as you make decisions, the information bar allows that. So as you're saying, I want to add or reduce patrol services, for example. What does that really mean? I'll tell you, it's going to not only result in a program being eliminated, but the impact is going to be you're going to have less patrol cars divisions out in this section of the area or at this time of the day.
So it would be great to have a one-page summary of what that looks like. Yeah. You have positives, but you get some delta, so we just have to make some informed decisions on really what that means. Yeah. And that's where the greater discussion comes in at the budget meetings, if we can get critical mass to be able to talk about or speak to voice. Yeah.
And this is certainly, excuse me, this is certainly not meant to be just thrown out there with no conversation around it. Certainly, there will be some people who maybe get a hold of it and look at it and have no context for it and they don't go any further. But the intention is that it's a part of the discussion. It's one more way to help people be involved. I mean, for some people, this is gonna, they're not going to touch it. For others, they're going, oh, that's kind of interesting. I like that. I don't mind sitting down and playing around with numbers for a while.
And then quickly, one other thing that we'll also receive with this tool, it's called the tax receipt. And we'll use the city of Coronas for now. What this essentially allows you to do is, plug in, let's say, 100,000, 5, So what this allows is essentially for any community member to kind of break down based on how much they're paying in their property tax, if you will, what that buys them in each of these, within administrative services. You're to have a city manager, city attorney, HR, finance, etc. You're really paying about $467 if are your property taxes are going towards that. And then just a long laundry list of each of the programs, what the dollar value is, heading all the way to your actual property taxes. So one thing I want to advise here is this is your property tax as a whole, but for our example, Morgan Hill, we're going to try to get down to that, portion that Morgan Hill gets. So Morgan Hill doesn't receive $10,000 that you pay in property taxes. It's really that, what that Morgan Hill 10%. What is that value? So it'll be less than that. That 467 number might just be $46. So not a bad deal, right? So this, I think, is the other very useful tool that we want to be able to communicate that relates back to the individual, on an everyday basis that they pay sales tax, property tax.
I'm just curious if there's any way, because we talked about, engaging even students. Because they're not, if they're under 18 and they may not be registered to vote, is there any way to track, we're going to track by age, if they're registered to vote, as far as that goes, as far as the constituents, there are people that filling this out?
The tool as it's designed, it doesn't have the capability. It does allow some analytics based on just pure demographics and other data. Can we include those questions?
If you're having students, anybody's under 18 that can't vote, I'm not saying we shouldn't take their advice, but I just kind of think that, I'm not opposed to polling them, but I just want to bring up.
Yeah, that's something we can look at. What part of it is, though, is the awareness level versus not all of this is going to say this is what we should do. Some of it is just going to raise awareness that it's complicated to try and figure this out if you don't have new revenue as a part of the equation. And I don't know if the tool will allow us to get information like age. It certainly doesn't cross-reference the voter registration files. And honestly, we've got a tool that, I don't know if you remember, Polko, we pushed out very briefly, and it's still sitting there. We got a lot of pushback on that, but it required information that people didn't want to give.
Oh, I see.
And so on something like this, I think the value is more in awareness. It's good to see what people submit, but it's also a real awareness awareness level raiser.
Right.
Yes, I got it.
You have a question?
So what do you guys do with feedback? So it's March 20th and you got 12,000 responses.
Sure.
Wow, that would be
That would be awesome if we get to that. I think that Fulton shared, even if you get upwards of 500 to 1,000, they would consider it to be a successful tool, utilization of the tool. But going back to your question, it's essentially on the back end, we're able to see within each of these programs where the community has said, taking the total average, increase in police services, on the revenue side, sales tax is preferred over any kind of parcel tax, or
So, but the tool like summarizes it.
It summarizes it, right?
A medium, a high, all that kind of stuff.
It's graphs, charts, and then we'll be able to take that data back, and I presume we would share it back with this group, and then also the council, and all that information would help develop the recommended budget.
So how does the tool manage stuffing, so to speak? Let me just be very blunt.
Sure.
How does the tool allow one respondent to give one piece of information versus one respondent who has a particular bias on something to put 100 responses in, and who's authorized to provide these responses or not? We also need to look at their, I would assume that there will be a very high imbalance of socioeconomic influencers to who respond. So how is this going to be communicated out that this is not, you get one vote and we're going to just tally up the votes and that's how we're going to actually create our budget in the future. So a lot of questions around the communication as well as the tool itself, and how that will then inform the aggregation of the responses which supposedly should be considered, if that's the whole purpose of this, beyond education and awareness, for the proposal.
And I think we briefly discussed this with the consultant, and for our challenges, going back to like Polka was a great example, getting folks to register and actually disclose information. Not everybody's willing to go ahead and go down to that level of detail to do that. From a tracking mechanism, they use IP addresses. So, you know, it's presumed that each entity or service connection has a unique IP address in a household. So, as you submit this, they're able to track all that information and gather it. Even if you have 50 submissions from this one IP address, they'll tell us, you know, that's what's happening. So we're able to further down and work on that.
If I could just add to that, just from past experience, I mean, obviously that's one thing you always think about. The reality is it doesn't really happen. Because it's not like it's just go punch a button 50 times.
Right.
It's, you know, you need to do there's some effort here. And while, you know, you could say all I want is police officers, ultimately the decision is at the city council level. And, you know, if we just want to use our whole general fund, or if what came back is the community wants to just spend the whole general fund budget on police officers, well, that's not realistic. That's not realistic, and there's other things that would have to be considered. And so it helps to inform it. It's not like if 100 people vote, it's not a vote. Or it's
communicated.
Well, and you can communicate all kinds of ways, and there will some people who will still say, but, you know, 50 people said this and only 2 people said this. And, you know, we've been there many times. But it's still worth doing.
Right.
Oh, yeah, I'm not saying it's not. I just.
So I have a thought, and I don't know if it's possible.
And I just want to be mindful, it is 11:25, and I still want to touch base on our schedule, so.
I'm just wondering though, if the program is building an algorithm, so at the very front end of the tool, and based on, say, these categories that are on the board, you can ask each citizen to say, where are your leading priorities? What's public safety, is it housing, whatever it turns out to be. So you're going to gather that information as a part of that right off the bat, which would be great, help inform the budget process. And then if the tool can summarize that at the very end, you can say, listen, your number one priority from your perspective was public safety. You impacted it by X. So the way this can provide that relevance is, say, I went through this whole spreadsheet, and I had 3 things that were important for me as a citizen, and I impacted either positively or negatively just based on my changes. So I'm just trying to gather as much information as possible based on people spending time and attention to the tool to be able to inform the larger discussion. So that can be built into the front end process, and there's an algorithm that can say all these changes really pushed up public safety by X%, but it pushed down housing by, you know, X times percent.
Right.
That would be helpful for the individual to say, this is what it means. So I don't know if that's a possibility.
Yeah, so I think, so I'm taking that and the executive summary, you know, recommendation back, and then I'll have a conversation with how we can make that happen with what we roll out.
And if we can't make it happen in this tool, we have lots of other ways to do that.
Exactly.
And we have lots of history on that exact thing. And we have polling results that are very much speak to that. And we will likely have to poll again if we are going to go out for a revenue measure in November. That's just going to need to happen.
And Maureen, I think one of the things we've talked about, I don't know if Harjo said it, the focus of this would be kind of on the general fund where we've identified the issue. So things, sometimes housing, just as an example, might not fall in there. And I know you were just using it as an example.
Right.
So it's going to be, I think, pretty narrowly focused on the general fund issues we've talked about for the last several months.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's essentially it, and then we'll go ahead and let's set this up, set up. We'll send out an email to this group so you can get comfortable, and then likely schedule another meeting where we can all walk through it together.
Okay, so real quick, thank you so much. I don't have the same check as Joe's have. I apologize. If I could steal someone's schedule. This one. It says draft budget calendar. So there's 2 purposes in sharing this with you, and it really is a draft. So please don't, go spreading this on social media or telling your friends, because this is still under. One is to give you an idea of all the different pieces that go into, that we internally are working on as we do create the budget, okay? But some things I wanted to call out for you. One, the next time that we would like to meet with this group is at the council goal setting workshop. And so that's a 2-day event, which I realize most of you cannot give up 2 days of your life to come and participate on a Friday and a Saturday with our council and our leadership team. However, if there's any of you who possibly can and would like to, please do join us. What we'd really like to make sure we have a majority of this group is on Saturday the 25th, which is up there, at our normal time, the 9 to 11:30, which I didn't put times up here, but I'll send out more details. I just wanted to give people an idea of what to expect.
That makes no sense. That's when the half day of the goal workshop occurs.
Yeah.
What do you mean that makes no sense?
You want us to have the second day of the concept?
I'd love to have you there the whole time, but since most people cannot come on Fridays, what we're asking is, since the next Saturday, in terms of the schedule we've been keeping.
So our meeting is to be in the audience of that meeting?
Well, yeah, with probably a few of you at the table, which it will really be focused on the work that has gone on with this group, where you're going. Does that make sense, Doug?
Yeah.
The question was whether we were going to be meeting in here separately, having an engaged meeting while the budget was
part of. The engaging would be part of, and that's already planned for. So in other words, in spending 2.5 hours here just as a group, we want this group to be a part of the council goal setting workshop to talk through this process and have a dialogue with council.
That I understand.
Okay, from 9 to 11:30 on January 25th.
And if you can make the 24th, good for you.
Yeah, and if you can make the 24th or part of the 24th, please do. I mean, it's, I think Doug most years comes to both days.
Just for the lunch.
Yes, we do serve lunch.
We should charge you for it.
We do, but I mean, it's a very informative day. And, you know, it's where it's informal. The council is all there. They're not sitting up on the dais. And there's opportunities for a lot more conversation. Plus you can hear the dialogue between our leadership team, the council, the community members that do show up. There aren't very many, and it's a huge time commitment, but it's an open forum. Okay, so that's in January. In February, if you look to the back of your sheet, you'll just kind of see where we're going. But February 29th is when I'm suggesting that this group would meet because I believe that the weekend before that is attached to the ski break that the schools will be on that week. Although this group probably isn't as impacted by that as some, but it's a week off for school, and so a lot of families go out of town that weekend. So I'm suggesting that. There's not a formal agenda yet for this, but this would be an excellent time for us to, as a group, work with the Balancing Act tool. The Balancing Act tool?
Yeah.
If you, and hopefully you'll have had a chance to play with it a little bit before that, but then, and maybe have some things you'd like to suggest should be recommended to city staff and the council to be considered as part of the budget. Then in March, I wanted to call out to you that we are already planning for a couple of different community meetings that we would hope that at least some of you would attend, but to work through a lot of this information in a very summarized way with the community, have maybe some opportunity to look at the Balancing Act tool. But those are 2 dates. One is a Saturday. We don't have a definite time yet, March 21st. And then that I'm going to suggest might be this group participating in the community meeting with other community members. Thursday, March 26th will be in the evening. We don't have a definite time, probably around 7 o'clock.
So, Maria, so are you saying that the March 21st would probably be our March meeting? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, got it.
But if there's any way, then we can divide up the group. If there's people who could come Thursday evening and to the Saturday, that would be beneficial so that you could be a part of that conversation with other community members. As you look at April, the recommended budget goes to, is released out to the community and the council on April 10th. It goes to the council formally at a council meeting on Wednesday, April 22nd. So we would be hoping that members of this group are there for that on April 22nd. And then we're going to have an additional community meeting on Thursday in the evening, April 30th. Then just so you're aware, the budget workshop, which is usually an all-day thing on a Friday, is scheduled for May 15th. That is where, as Doug was suggesting, some different special interests in our community came, and I don't think last year was the first time that's happened. Things have come up at the budget workshop in other years. But that's where a lot of input should be provided prior to that, so that if there's going to be a change in what the council does, that has already been talked about. And so if they're not going to consider special interests at that meeting, then that's a conversation that should have happened prior to that. And then we're hoping for budget adoption on Wednesday, June 17th. And at the same time, although I don't have it outlined down here, a parallel track will be, if we're really moving forward with a revenue measure, the goal would be to have council make a formal decision that they're going to move forward with a revenue measure in November 2020. Then from that point, it really gets turned over to you in a very serious way. If there is a decision to move forward with a revenue measure, as I've said many times before, city staff cannot campaign for or against a revenue measure or any type of measure on the ballot. Residents can, council members can, businesses can, but city staff cannot. We can help provide factual information, and in fact, the last election we did go around and share factual information on some of the measures, because I think we had 3 last time, which is really unusual for Morgan Hill. And we would plan to do that, but factual information isn't the same as saying, and we think you should vote for this, and here's why. Ethics. But all of you can do that. Or you can go out and say, and we think you shouldn't vote for this, and here's why. Likewise, you all can do that in relation to the hotel, the 2 hotels that'll be on the ballot in March. Which I think there's a lot of education in the community that needs to happen around that. And this is not speaking for it or against it, it's just I live here in this community too. And I was approached by a petitioner in relation to that, and the information that was given out just absolutely was not truthful at all. And many people who live here in the community have that same experience, but didn't necessarily know that what they were hearing wasn't truthful. So, yeah, again, not for or against, just saying there needs to be some factual information shared. And if you do feel that hotels are a good thing for the community and that these hotels should move forward, that's something that you could all be doing out in the community to make a difference. So that is basically the end of today. We're just a couple minutes over. I sincerely appreciate everybody being here on a December Saturday morning with holidays looming. I wish all of you an amazing holiday season, whatever you might celebrate or not celebrate, and continue to thank you for your involvement.